The Gravital are a race of machine life forms first introduced in C.M. Kosemen's book, All Tomorrows. They seem to come in a variety of shapes and sizes, with 2 examples being given in the book, the first being spherical in shape and with the ability to hover, and the second being of a flat slab shape. They each possess an eye, which is red, and have 2 or more holes beneath it which are likely to act as a loudspeaker for communicating with others of their kind. They possess no external limbs, but have the ability to move objects and change the world around them by use of subtle manipulations of gravity fields. The Gravital first began life as star people, genetically modified humans created in a joint effort between Earth and Mars following a catastrophic interplanetary war somewhere around the 31st century, many thousands of years after the star people had spread throughout the galaxy and colonized an untold number of worlds. They came into contact with the primary antagonists of the story, the alien race known as the Q. While many details of the initial contact between the Star People and the Q are not known, it is known that the Star People did put up a great resistance against the Q invaders, and as each colonized world fell to the Q one by one, the inhabitants of these worlds were conquered and then genetically modified into a variety of strange and often horrifying new forms. Many millions of years ago, on the Gravital's homeworld, the Star People had fought the Q and lost, as did all the other worlds. The people of this world were captured and modified into something else. This new form was quite human-like when compared to their counterparts on most other Q-conquered planets, such as the Titans, the Lopsiders, or the Temptor. These new beings, the former Star People, came to be known as the Ruin Haunters. As can be seen from the illustration, they have retained a mostly human appearance, the only feature that would really distinguish them being their large, drooping noses. The Ruin Haunters name comes from the fact that, unlike on other worlds, the Q, this time, hadn't really cleaned up after themselves before leaving. While on other worlds, the Q had wiped away all traces of the Star People's society and technology. They hadn't, for reasons unknown, done the same on this planet, or at least not to the same extent. When the Q had genetically modified these Star People into the Ruin Haunters, they apparently hadn't gone to the same lengths as they had with their other twisted creations when suppressing their intelligence. They had been reduced to the level of hunter-gatherers, but their ability to regain their sentience and intelligence had not been taken away from them. After the Q moved on from this world, they left behind much Star People technology, and Q technology as well. This meant that, instead of their society progressing naturally as many of their cousins did on distant worlds, slowly and painfully evolving towards the level of advanced civilization, the Ruin Haunters instead had an immense level of ancient alien technology completely at their disposal, right from their beginning, not having earned any of it. For the first few thousand years, it can be assumed that the Ruin Haunters simply wandered about the ancient ruins, not comprehending what they were or what they meant. But over the millennia, as their sentience returned and a primitive civilization came into being, they found themselves able to use and replicate the ancient technology, even though they weren't even close to really understanding it. It had fallen into the wrong hands, young, immature hands. They became spoiled brats of a species, considering themselves the only true heirs to the Star People. Once their relatives on other planets, such as the Killerfolk, Pterosapiens, and the Tool Breeders, had begun contacting each other and forming a great alliance, the Ruin Haunters stubbornly refused to engage with them, arrogantly considering all other post-human species to be beneath them and not worthy of the bygone Star People. The technology had been left on their world, and hence they must be special. It was this attitude that would create a deeply ingrained extreme narcissism in this species that would have devastating and catastrophic consequences, both for themselves and for all organic life in the galaxy further down the line. But before this point, there is the question of where the Ruin Haunters ended and the Gravital began. The Ruin Haunters as a race were too young to fully appreciate what they had been left by their highly advanced ancestors, and so they subjected themselves to 5 consecutive world wars, 2 of them thermonuclear in nature. They managed to pull themselves through, hardened by their terrifying and violent history of war, but a new problem was now on the horizon. The sun of the Ruin Haunters world was expanding, and, even with their incredible technology that they had at their disposal, they couldn't do a thing to stop what was happening. Unable to change what was happening to their sun, and with their organic bodies unable to cope with the extreme heat that they were now finding themselves living in, they decided to change themselves. Their level of advancement was such that they could now implant their minds into machines. Earlier models were comprised of a metal shell that would contain the organic brains of the last ruin haunters, but later on, a way to store their minds on quantum computers was discovered. These minds were likely downloaded and then installed into machine bodies, eliminating the need for human brains and thus bringing to a close the era of the ruin haunters and giving birth to the galaxy's first fully inorganic machine civilization, the Gravital. By this point, the Gravital had become the most advanced post-human species in existence, even more so than the Astromorphs, who themselves had by now attained a godlike status. They had spent millions of years convinced that they were the Star People's true heirs and had, like the Q before them, declared themselves the rulers of all in existence. The Gravital used enormous sails, millions of miles across, to block out each planet's sun, and this was done with such efficiency that every attacked world was caught completely off guard. Over a 10,000-year period, they invaded, annihilated, and caused the extinction of many post-human species, peoples who had suffered through millions of years of evolution to reach the point that they were at. Type 2 and Type 3 civilizations. The snake peoples, the killer folk, the asymmetrics, all were wiped out, except one. The bug facers, for reasons unknown, weren't completely wiped out, and the Gravital instead chose to keep them as pets. They used the ancient art of genetic manipulation to change these people into new forms, just as the Q had millions of years before them. The bug facers became known as the subjects, and were owned by the Gravital and existed as the only organics in the new machine empire. It has been stated in the book All Tomorrows that the Gravital, despite their efforts to wipe out and destroy all of their post-human relatives, didn't hold any particular hatred towards them, and their destruction was simply because the Gravital didn't acknowledge them as alive. In much the same way that we humans eat vegetables that grow, or mow the grass on our lawns and gardens, both of which are alive and grow, the Gravital destroyed them because, while they knew the post-humans were alive, they didn't fully acknowledge that they were living things, and simply thought of them as being in the way. They had spent too long in their machine forms, too many millions of years removed from their organic ancestors and relatives on other planets, and too long believing themselves to be the center of the universe, that it had become completely impossible for them to identify with organic life on any conceivable level. The Gravital were responsible for the greatest mass extinctions and genocides that the galaxy had ever seen, but they did not consider themselves evil, and they were not a race of heartless mechanical automatons with no thoughts or feelings of their own. They still had human minds stored within them, and they had their own thoughts, feelings, and ideas which often put them at odds with others of their kind. The machine empire, made up of the Gravitals, was often struggling with internal conflict, and in order to divert the attention of its citizens away from these troubling issues, a new enemy was needed, something to unite the machines. Their millions of years of egomania had finally reached its fever pitch, and the machine empire declared war on the godlike Astromorphs. The war between these two empires was perhaps the most cataclysmic to date, with some conflicts lasting millions of years. It would spell the end of the machine empire. They lost the war, and the Astromorphs destroyed them, thus bringing an end to the machine empire and the Gravital, once and for all.